Commander Velsara had conquered 17 star systems. She had burned cities and destroyed fleets without feeling anything at all. Her crystalline skin had never known fear. Her 4 hearts had never beaten faster in panic. She was a warrior of the Kethari Empire. And warriors did not know fear. But when her intelligence officer said the name Danny Cole, her hands began to shake. She gripped the edge of her command console and tried to hide it. The other officers on the bridge were watching her. They had all heard the stories. They had all heard the whispers that traveled through Kethari space like a disease. And now they watched their commander tremble at the mention of a single human name. "Are you certain?" Velsara asked. Her voice was steady. She had trained for decades to keep her voice steady. "Yes, Commander. The human called Danny Cole has been confirmed in this sector. He was seen 3 days ago at the Proxima station." Velsara closed her eyes. She remembered Proxima. She remembered everything about that day 5 years ago, when she had learned that humans were not what the Empire believed them to be. The story of Danny Cole began on a small mining colony called Proxima 7. It was an ugly place, floating in the darkness between stars. Humans lived there because humans could live anywhere. They dug ore from asteroids and shipped it across the galaxy. They worked long hours and died young, and never complained because this was simply how life worked for them. Danny Cole was 43 years old when the Kethari came. He had spent most of those years hauling cargo through empty space in a ship called the Rusty Nail. The ship was older than Danny. It made strange noises when it flew. Parts of it were held together with tape and hope. But it worked, and that was enough for Danny. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was just a tired man with rough hands and a bad back who wanted nothing more than to finish his shift and drink a cold beer. On the day the Kethari attacked, Danny was loading cargo containers onto his ship. The work was boring and heavy, and his shoulders ached. He was thinking about dinner. He was thinking about sleep. He was not thinking about war. The first plasma bolt hit the colony dome like thunder from an angry god. Danny looked up and saw fire spreading across the sky. He saw the dome crack and atmosphere begin to leak into space. He saw people running and screaming and falling. Then he saw the Kethari. They came down from their ships like beautiful nightmares. Their bodies were made of something that looked like living glass. They stood 8 feet tall and moved with the grace of dancers. Their eyes glowed blue in the darkness. They carried weapons that turned people into ash with a single shot. Danny watched them march through the streets of the colony. He watched them grab humans and throw them into lines. He watched them shoot anyone who resisted. He watched them laugh as children cried for their parents. Something changed inside Danny Cole at that moment. Something old and dark woke up behind his eyes. It was the same thing that had helped his ancestors survive ice ages and predators and wars that lasted generations. It was the thing that made humans dangerous. He did not run away. He walked toward the invaders. The first Kethari warrior he encountered was collecting slaves near the medical center. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall. Its crystalline armor gleamed like diamonds. It held a plasma rifle in its long fingers and shouted orders in a language Danny did not understand. Danny was holding a mining pick. It was a simple tool, heavy and sharp, designed for breaking rocks. He had carried it with him without thinking, the way a worker carries his tools. The Kethari saw Danny approaching. It pointed its rifle at him and made a sound that might have been laughter. Here was another weak human, ready to surrender, ready to become a slave. Danny did not surrender. Danny swung the mining pick with 30 years of working man's strength behind it. He aimed for the joint between the alien's helmet and chest plate, the small gap where the crystalline armor was thin. The pick went through. The alien made a sound like breaking glass and fell. Danny pulled his weapon free and kept walking. The second Kethari warrior saw what happened to the first. It hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Danny closed the distance between them. The mining pick rose and fell again. The third warrior fired its weapon. The plasma bolt burned a hole through Danny's left shoulder. The pain was worse than anything he had ever felt. His arm went dead. Blood poured down his side. Danny did not stop. He could not stop. The thing that had woken inside him would not let him stop. He killed the third warrior with his one good arm. Then the fourth. Then the fifth. By the time Danny reached the colony's communication center, 7 Cathari lay dead behind him. His left arm hung useless at his side. 3 of his ribs were cracked from a blow he barely remembered taking. Blood covered half his face and dripped onto the floor as he walked. He found the communication console and activated it with shaking fingers. He broadcast a message on every frequency, making sure every Cathari ship in orbit would hear him. "This colony is under my protection," Danny said. His voice was rough and tired, like a man who had worked too long without rest. "Leave now, or I will kill every last one of you." The Cathari commander heard the message from her ship. She laughed. One wounded human was threatening her entire landing force. One bleeding, broken man was telling an empire to run away. She ordered a full ground assault. She sent 200 warriors to crush this insect who dared to challenge the Cathari. 3 days later, she was the only survivor. She had watched from her ship as Danny Cole dismantled her forces. He used traps made from mining equipment. He used ambushes in dark corridors. He used the colony's systems against them, venting atmosphere in sections where her troops gathered, cutting power to areas where they tried to rest. He fought for 3 days without sleep. He fought with broken bones and wounds that should have killed him. He fought with the relentless fury of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. When it was over, Valsara fled into the void. She left her dead soldiers behind. She left her pride behind. She carried only one thing with her as she ran. Fear. She had learned something about humans that day. Something her empire had never understood. Humans were not soft. Humans were not weak. Humans were creatures forged by a brutal world, shaped by millions of years of survival against impossible odds. And when you pushed them too far, when you threatened everything they loved, they became something terrifying. 5 years later, standing on the bridge of her flagship, Valsara still remembered. She still shuddered when she heard the name Danny Cole. The whisper in the stars had become a scream. The Cathari had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species. They had built an empire that stretched across 100 star systems. They believed they understood war better than anyone. They did not understand humans. The Cathari homeworld was a peaceful place. It had low gravity and a gentle climate. There were no predators in their forests. There were no diseases that killed without warning. Their evolution had been slow and comfortable, and their wars had evolved the same way. When Cathari fought each other, they followed ancient rules. Battles were announced in advance. Warriors met on chosen fields. There were rituals and ceremonies and codes of honor. The winner was decided, and the loser accepted defeat gracefully. Very few actually died. This was civilized warfare. This was how intelligent species were supposed to fight. Then they met the humans. Earth was nothing like the Cathari home world. Earth was a planet that tried to kill its children every single day. Predators hunted in the darkness. Diseases swept through populations without mercy. The weather changed from burning heat to freezing cold. Earthquakes shattered cities. Floods drowned nations. Fires consumed forests. And through all of this, humans survived. They survived because they refused to die. They survived because giving up was simply not part of their nature. They survived because something in their blood told them to keep fighting, keep struggling, keep going forward, no matter what stood in their way. Danny Cole was a product of this world. His ancestors had fought saber-toothed cats with wooden spears. They had crossed frozen wastelands with nothing but animal skins for warmth. They had sailed across oceans without knowing what waited on the other side. They had survived plagues and famines and wars that killed. Millions. This history lived inside Danny. It lived inside every human. And when danger came, it woke up. The Cathari had studied humans before the invasion. They had read reports and analyzed data and come to conclusions that made sense to them. Humans were small. Humans were fragile. Humans lived short lives and died easily from injuries that Cathari could survive. The reports said nothing about human persistence. They said nothing about human rage. They said nothing about what happened when you threatened a people a human loved. After the Battle of Proxima 7, the Cathari tried to understand what had happened. Their scientists studied every piece of data they could find. They watched recordings of Danny Cole fighting their warriors. They analyzed his movements and his tactics and his weapons. What they found terrified them. Danny Cole had no special training. He had never served in any military. He had never studied combat or strategy or warfare. He was just a cargo pilot who worked with his hands and drank cheap beer and watched old movies in his small cabin. But when the fighting started, something took over. His body moved in ways that seemed impossible. He reacted to attacks before they happened. He found weaknesses in Cathari armor that their own warriors did not know existed. He kept fighting through injuries that should have stopped him. The Cathari scientists had a word for this. They called it the survival response. It was something that lived deep in human brains, something left over from millions of years of evolution on a deadly world. When humans faced true danger, this ancient part of their mind took control. It made them faster. It made them stronger. It made them ignore pain and fear and everything else that might slow them down. It turned ordinary people into something very close to monsters. Danny Cole was not the first human to experience this. Humans had stories about it going back thousands of years. They told tales of mothers lifting heavy machines to save their children. They spoke of soldiers fighting through wounds that should have killed them instantly. They remembered warriors who seemed to become something more than human in the heat of battle. The Cathari had no such stories. Their bodies had never needed to develop these abilities. Their world had never demanded this kind of desperate strength. And so they could not understand how a tired cargo pilot had killed nearly 50 of their warriors in 3 days. The story of Proxima 7 spread through Cathari space. Warriors who had once laughed at humans began to speak in whispers. Commanders who had planned easy conquests began to hesitate. The empire that had ruled for 10,000 years began to feel something it had never felt before. Danny Cole did not know any of this. After the battle, he collapsed in the communication center and slept for 2 days. When he woke up, human rescue ships had arrived. Doctors treated his wounds. Reporters asked him questions. Officials offered him medals and money and praise. Danny refused all of it. He just wanted to go back to his ship and his cargo runs, and his quiet life. But the Cathari would not let him. They could not accept what had happened. They could not let a single human make fools of their mighty empire. So they sent hunters after Danny Cole, assassins, warriors, seeking glory by killing the monster of PROXIMA-7. The first assassin found Danny at a refueling station 3 months after the battle. It was a Cathari blade master, trained from birth in the art of killing. It challenged Danny to ritual combat. Expecting the human to die with honor. Danny shot it with a plasma pistol he had taken from a dead warrior on Proxima 7. The assassin fell before it could even draw its weapon. Humans did not fight with honor. Humans fought to win. The second assassin was more careful. It tried to poison Danny's food. Danny noticed a strange smell and fed the meal to a stray cat instead. The cat died. Danny found the assassin hiding in his cargo bay and threw it out an airlock. The third assassin brought friends. 5 warriors attacked Danny at a trading post. When the fight was over, 3 of them were dead and 2 were running for their lives. Each failed attempt made the legend grow. Each dead assassin added to the whispers that spread through Cathari space. Danny Cole was not just a man anymore. He was becoming something else. He was becoming a symbol. Humans across the frontier heard the stories and felt something they had not felt in a long time. Hope. Here was proof that the mighty Cathari could be beaten. Here was proof that one person could make a difference. Here was proof that they did not have to accept slavery and death. They began to resist. Small acts at first: sabotage, smuggling, hidden weapons. Then larger acts: ambush, raids, open defiance. And always, when they gathered in secret to plan the rebellion, they spoke his name. Danny Cole, the man who would not die, the man who made the Cathari afraid. Danny heard the stories about himself and did not believe them. He was no hero. He was just a man who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had done what needed to be done. The legend people told was about someone else, someone braver and stronger than he could ever be. But legends do not care about truth. Legends grow on their own. And this one was just beginning. Kate Brennan was working as a combat medic on Station 12 when the Cathari burned it to ash. She watched her friends die. She watched her patients die. She watched everything she had built disappear in fire and screaming. She was supposed to die too. A Cathari warrior found her hiding in a supply closet. It raised its weapon and prepared to add one more body to the thousands it had already made that day. Then something hit the warrior from behind. A metal pipe, swung with desperate strength by a wounded man who should have been dead hours ago. Danny Cole had come to Station 12 looking for medical supplies. He found a massacre instead. And like he had done on Proxima 7, he refused to accept it. He saved Kate that day. He saved 17 other survivors by fighting through the Cathari forces and leading them to his ship. The rusty nail barely made it out of the station before the whole thing exploded. Kate looked at the tired, bleeding man who had saved her life and made a decision. She was not going back to her quiet life. She was not going to hide and wait for the Cathari to find her again. She was going to fight. "You need a medic," she told Danny. "Someone to patch you up when you do stupid things." Danny looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just trying to stay alive." "That's fine," Kate replied. "I'll follow you anyway." She was the first. But she was not the last. Over the next year, others found their way to Danny Cole. There was Pete Dawson, a former soldier who had lost his entire unit to a Cathari ambush. There was Linda Mason, an engineer who could build weapons from spare parts and broken dreams. There was old Henry Grant, a retired pilot who still knew how to fly better than men half his age. They came because they had nowhere else to go. They came because they had lost everything and wanted revenge. They came because the name Danny Cole had become a beacon in the darkness, a promise that someone was still fighting back. Danny did not want to lead them. He had never wanted to lead anyone. But Kate convinced him that he had no choice. "These people need hope," she said. "They need someone to follow. Whether you like it or not, you're that someone." So Danny became a leader. He taught his people how to fight the way he had learned to fight on Proxima 7. He taught them to use traps and ambushes instead of open battles. He taught them to strike fast and disappear before the enemy could respond. He taught them that there was no such thing as fighting dirty when you were fighting for survival. They called themselves Cole's Irregulars, and they became the most feared group in the sector. The Cathari sent patrols to hunt them. The irregulars destroyed the patrols. The Cathari sent larger forces. The irregulars led them into asteroid fields and watched them crash. The Cathari sent their best warriors, trained hunters who had never failed a mission. They failed this time. Word spread through human space like wildfire. Colonies that had lived in fear began to resist. Ships that had once fled at the sight of Cathari vessels now stood and fought. 1,000 small rebellions sparked to life, and all of them looked to Danny Cole for inspiration. Haven Station became the unofficial home of the resistance. It was an old mining platform, abandoned years ago when the ore ran out. Danny and his people rebuilt it into a fortress and a refuge. Humans fleeing Cathari territory came there seeking safety. Fighters seeking purpose came there seeking direction. 10,000 people lived on Haven Station. Families, children, old people who had seen too much war, young people who had never known peace. They all shared one thing in common. They believed in Danny Cole. Danny walked through the station every day, talking to the people who lived there. He learned their names. He listened to their stories. He held crying children and comforted grieving widows and promised that things would get better. He did not know if he was lying. Kate watched him carry this weight and worried about what it was doing to him. The legend of Danny Cole grew larger every day, but the man behind the legend was getting smaller. He slept less. He smiled less. The tired look in his eyes became a permanent shadow. "You can't save everyone," Kate told him one night. "You're going to destroy yourself trying." Danny looked at her with those haunted eyes. "I have to try," he said. "These people gave up everything because they believed in me. I can't let them down. You're just one man. Then I'll have to be enough." "Commander." Velsara watched the human resistance grow and felt her fear transform into something else. Anger, frustration, shame. Her empire was being humiliated by a species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. Something had to be done. She requested an audience with the High Council. She stood before the leaders of the Cathari Empire and described what was happening in the frontier sectors. She showed them reports of destroyed patrols and liberated colonies. She played recordings of human fighters shouting Danny Cole's name as they charged into battle. The council listened in silence. When Velsara finished speaking, the eldest counselor asked a single question. "What do you propose?" Velsara took a deep breath. "We must destroy Haven Station. We must kill Danny Cole. We must crush this rebellion before it spreads any further." The council deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they gave Velsara what she wanted. They gave her the largest fleet ever assembled in Cathari history. 300 warships, 50,000 ground troops, enough firepower to reduce a planet to dust. "Bring us his head," the eldest counselor commanded. "End this legend once and for all." Velsara accepted the order with grim satisfaction. She finally had the power to destroy the man who haunted her nightmares. She finally had the chance to prove that the Cathari Empire was still the greatest force in the galaxy. She did not understand what she was about to face. Humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. And Danny Cole was about to lose everything. The fleet departed for Haven Station. 300 ships carrying death and destruction. Velsara stood on her bridge and watched the stars slide past and thought about revenge. She should have thought about fear instead. The warning came 3 days before the fleet arrived. A scout ship spotted the Cathari Armada and sent a message before being destroyed. Danny Cole read the report and felt the blood drain from his face. 300 warships, 50,000 soldiers. Coming straight for Haven Station, he gathered his commanders in the main hall and showed them the numbers. Nobody spoke for a long time. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Haven Station had 12 armed ships and fewer than 500 fighters. They had no chance of winning. "We need to evacuate," Kate said. "Get the civilians out while we still can." Danny nodded. "How many can we move in 3 days?" Linda Mason ran the numbers on her tablet. Her face went pale. "Maybe 2,000 if we push the transports to their limits. Maybe 3,000 if we get lucky. That leaves 7,000 people behind." The room fell silent again. 7,000 people. 7,000 men and women and children who would die when the Cathari arrived. 7,000 souls with nowhere to run and no one to save them. "Then we buy more time," Danny said. Everyone turned to look at him. "The transports keep running. They take everyone they can, and they don't stop until the last person is safe. Meanwhile, we hold the station." "Danny, that's suicide," Pete Dawson said. "We can't fight 50,000 soldiers. We don't have to beat them. We just have to slow them down. Every hour we hold is another ship full of people who make it out alive." Kate grabbed his arm. "You'll die. Everyone who stays will die." Danny looked at her with those tired eyes that had seen too much. "I know." She wanted to argue. She wanted to scream at him that this was madness, that throwing his life away would not bring back the people they had lost. But she looked around the room and saw the faces of the other fighters. She saw determination instead of despair. She saw purpose instead of fear. They knew what Danny was asking. They were choosing to stay anyway. "I'm coming with you," Kate said. Danny shook his head. "No, you're getting on a transport. Someone needs to survive this. Someone needs to tell the story of what happened here. Don't you dare tell me to run. I've been with you since Station 12. I didn't run then, and I won't run now." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Danny smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. Stubborn woman, stupid man. In the end, 47 fighters stayed behind. 47 humans against 50,000 Cathari. They spent the next 3 days preparing the station for battle. They set traps in every corridor. They rigged explosives in every section. They created kill zones and ambush points and dead ends that would cost the enemy dearly. Danny worked alongside his people until his hands bled. He helped carry equipment and plant charges and reinforce barricades. He told jokes and shared meals and pretended that what they were doing was not absolutely insane. On the last night, he sat with Kate on observation deck and watched the transport ships leave one by one. 8,000 people had been evacuated. 2,000 remained, mostly the sick and the old who could not survive the journey. "I should stay with them," Kate said. Danny took her hand. "You need to live. The resistance needs you. Those people on those transports need someone to lead them after I'm gone. I don't want to lead anyone. I just want you to come with me. You know I can't do that." Kate leaned her head against his shoulder. "I hate you sometimes, I know." They sat together in silence as the stars turned slowly overhead. It was the last peaceful moment either of them would ever have. The Cathari fleet arrived at dawn. 300 warships filled the sky like a wall of metal and death. They surrounded Haven Station and began bombarding it from every direction. The station's shields held for the first hour, then began to fail. Sections of the outer hull tore away and spun into the void. When the bombardment stopped, the ground forces came. Dropships descended like angry wasps, carrying warriors hungry for revenge. They breached the station in a dozen places and began their advance. They expected the humans to surrender. They expected easy victory against a broken enemy. They found something else entirely. Danny Cole and his 47 fighters turned Haven Station into a nightmare. Every corridor became a death trap. Every room became an ambush. The Cathari pushed forward and died. They pushed forward again and died again. They sent wave after wave of warriors, and the bodies piled higher. The humans fought like nothing the Cathari had ever seen. They fought with guns and knives and bare hands. They fought through wounds that should have killed them. They fought with smiles on their faces and curses on their lips, and absolutely no intention of giving up. Danny was everywhere. He appeared in places where the fighting was thickest and turned the tide. He pulled wounded fighters to safety and sent fresh ones into the fray. He led counterattacks that pushed the Cathari back and killed their officers and shattered their confidence. 18 hours. That is how long the battle lasted. 18 hours of constant fighting, of blood and fire and death. When it was over, 43 of Danny's fighters were dead. Only 4 remained standing, and none of them were unwounded, but the transports were safe. Every single civilian had escaped. Danny stood in the ruined command center, bleeding from a dozen wounds. His right eye was swollen shut. His left arm was broken in 2 places. He could barely stand, but he refused to fall. The Cathari were regrouping for their final assault. 14 of their cruisers hung in space outside the station, waiting to finish the job their ground forces had failed to complete. Danny looked at the reactor controls in front of him. Linda Mason had shown him how to trigger an overload before she died defending a barricade on Deck 7. It was supposed to be a last resort. He thought about Kate on one of those transport ships. He thought about the 10,000 people who would live because of what he had done here. He thought about the legend of Danny Cole and wondered if anyone would remember the real man behind it. Then he reached for the controls. "For everyone we saved?" he whispered. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a new star. 14 Cathari cruisers vanished in an instant. Haven Station became a field of burning debris and scattered wreckage. Commander Valsara watched from her flagship and felt no victory. Only the cold certainty that she had created something far worse than a legend. She had created a martyr. The silence after the explosion lasted for a very long time. Commander Valsara stood on the bridge of her flagship and stared at the debris field that had been Haven Station. Pieces of twisted metal drifted through the void. Bodies floated among the wreckage, both human and Cathari, united in death as they never could have been in life. Danny Cole was dead. The man who had haunted her nightmares for 5 years was finally gone. She had won. So why did she feel like she had lost? She looked at what remained of her fleet. Of the 300 warships that had arrived, fewer than 100 were still capable of flight. The others were damaged beyond repair or destroyed completely. 30,000 soldiers were dead. 30,000 of the Empire's finest warriors, killed by 47 humans defending a mining station. The mathematics of the battle made no sense. It should have been impossible. Yet here she was, standing in the aftermath of a victory that felt more like defeat. Her communications officer approached with a trembling voice. "Commander, we're receiving reports from across the sector." "What reports?" "Attacks. Human resistance cells are rising everywhere. They're striking military installations, supply depots, patrol routes. There are dozens of incidents, and the number is growing." Valsara closed her eyes. Of course, the humans had been watching. They had seen the Cathari Empire send its greatest fleet against a single station. They had seen Danny Cole hold that fleet at bay for 18 hours, before sacrificing himself to destroy a quarter of it. They had seen that the Empire could bleed. Over the next 6 months, the situation grew worse. Every world with a human population experienced some form of resistance. Ships were sabotaged. Officers were assassinated. Supplies disappeared. The whispers about Danny Cole transformed into open worship. They called themselves Cole's children now. They wore patches showing his face. They wrote his name on walls and ships and weapons. They shouted it as a battle cry when they attacked. They spoke it as a prayer when they were afraid. Danny Cole had become more powerful in death than he ever was in life. Kate Brennan led the survivors of Haven Station to safety on a distant world. She organized them. She trained them. She transformed grief into purpose and tears into determination. When the Human Confederacy finally announced its formation 6 months after Danny's death, she stood at its head. Admiral Kate Brennan of the Confederate Navy. She was not the same woman who had hidden in a supply closet on Station 12. That woman had been broken and afraid. This woman had iron in her spine and fire in her eyes. She had watched the man she loved sacrifice himself to save others. And she intended to make sure that sacrifice meant something. The Confederacy declared war on the Cathari Empire on the 1-year anniversary of the Battle of Haven Station. They broadcast a single image across every frequency in the galaxy. It was a picture of Danny Cole, taken from the station's final transmission. His face was bloody and broken. His eye was swollen shut. His body was covered in wounds. But he was smiling. Even at the end, facing certain death, he was smiling. Beneath the image were 4 words. Remember what we cost them. The war lasted 7 years. It was brutal and bloody and terrible. Millions died on both sides. Worlds burned. Fleets were shattered. The galaxy trembled with the violence of 2 species fighting for survival. But the humans never gave up. No matter how many battles they lost, no matter how many people they buried, they kept fighting. They had learned something about themselves on Haven Station. They had learned that they were stronger than they ever imagined. Danny Cole had shown them that Commander Valsara fought in the war until the very end. She commanded fleets and won battles and did everything in her power to save her empire. It was not enough. The humans were too persistent, too stubborn, too willing to sacrifice everything for victory. In the end, the Cathari Empire surrendered. They gave up 100 star systems. They paid reparations. They accepted terms that would have seemed impossible before a tired cargo pilot on a small Mayan colony decided to fight back. Valsara was present at the surrender ceremony. She stood across the table from Admiral Kate Brennan and felt the weight of history pressing down on her. This was the woman Danny Cole had loved. This was the woman who had turned his death into a weapon and used it to destroy an empire. "You won," Valsara said quietly. He would be proud. Kate looked at her for a long moment. He didn't want any of this. He just wanted to live a quiet life and fly his ship and drink bad beer. You took that from him. I know. Then you understand why we had to finish what he started. Valsara nodded. She understood perfectly. The Cathari had pushed the humans too far. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They had created their own destruction through arrogance and cruelty. Years later, when the war had faded into history and the galaxy had found an uneasy peace, scholars would write about Danny Cole. They would analyze his tactics and study his battles and debate whether he was a genius or simply lucky. They would build statues and name ships after him and teach children about his sacrifice. But among the Cathari, there were no debates. There were only whispers that parents told their children about the human who would not die. Warriors spoke his name before battle as a reminder of what they faced. Leaders used his story as a warning against underestimating the small and the weak. Valsara lived to old age. She retired to a quiet world and spent her final years watching the stars and thinking about the past. Sometimes she dreamed about that Mayan colony. She dreamed about the moment she had first seen a wounded human walking toward an army of Cathari warriors. She had not understood what she was seeing at the time. Now she knew. She had been watching the end of an empire in her final hours. As her four hearts began to slow and fail, she thought about Danny Cole one last time. She thought about a tired man with rough hands and haunted eyes who had changed the course of history because he refused to let innocent people die. She whispered his name in the darkness. And even after all these years, even at the end of everything. She felt herself shudder. Some legends never die. Some names are whispered forever. And somewhere in the void, between stars, the ghost of a cargo pilot smiled and flew on into eternity.